Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and something feels different. You can't explain why, but your thoughts no longer sound like your own. Every idea you have, every fear you feel, every decision you make, it's as if someone whispered it into your head before you even thought it. You believe you're acting freely, but your freedom was designed. Your emotions were sculpted. Your loyalty was engineered. You're inside a system that rewires minds without chains, without violence, without permission. Welcome to the hidden architecture of cult mind control, a world where reality bends, individuality dissolves, and obedience becomes sacred truth. This isn't science fiction. This is psychology weaponized. 1. The anatomy of control. Mind controlled, but how perfectly you fit them. This is the first stage of control. Capture the heart before you capture the mind. 2. The isolation phase. Once emotional attachment is secured, the second phase begins. Isolation. Not with chains, but with ideology. They separate you from your past, from your relationships, from anyone who might pull you back to reality. Start subtly. They don't understand you. They're jealous of your awakening. They'll only drag you down. Each sentence chips away at your old world. You begin to see outsiders as threats, agents of darkness, non-believers, or simply lost souls. The cult doesn't have to lock you away. You'll do it yourself, believing it's for your own good. When isolation sets in, dependency blooms. Every emotional need, every fear, every question, the answers come only from the group. You stop thinking alone because you're never allowed to be alone. Time becomes their tool too. Endless meetings, rituals, group chants, sleepless nights. The mind becomes exhausted, vulnerable, open to suggestion. Exhaustion is obedience disguised as devotion. Soon, the outside world feels toxic, and the cult feels safe, even holy. They tell you that leaving means betrayal, and your mind believes it because it's been conditioned to. This is isolation as programming. Not just physical distance, but psychological quarantine. Your old identity is slowly erased, and what's left is a blank canvas ready to be rewritten. 3. Information control. Cults survive not by convincing, but by restricting. They don't need to make you believe new truths. They just need to cut you off from old ones. Information control is the cornerstone of mind domination. They tell you what to read, what to watch, what to believe, and who to trust. If an outsider criticizes the group, they're labeled an enemy. If you start to doubt, you're told it's negative energy or a test. Every question becomes proof of your weakness. The result? A closed cognitive loop where truth no longer matters. Only loyalty. This manipulation is subtle but devastating. You begin to doubt your own perception of reality. If the leader says black is white, you'll start to question your own eyes. That's how far information control can go. Cults often replace objective reality with a controlled vocabulary. They redefine words to suit their narrative. Freedom means obedience. Truth means conformity. Doubt means sin. When words are reprogrammed, thought itself collapses. Because if you can't name your reality, you can't challenge it. Soon, every external source of truth, media, family, logic, becomes the enemy. The only safe information is what comes from inside the group. It's a self-sustaining system of ignorance. And the deeper you go, the less capable you become of seeing it. 4. Language manipulation. Language is thought. Change the words and you change the mind. Cult leaders understand this better than most psychologists. They create new linguistic worlds, codes, chants, affirmations that subtly reshape cognition. Members start to speak differently. They use the same phrases, tone, rhythm. Their vocabulary shrinks, and with it, their range of thought. This is no accident. It's linguistic hypnosis, a way to limit the mind's ability to question. When you repeat the same sacred phrases every day, you begin to believe them on a cellular level. Repetition bypasses logic and embeds meaning directly into emotion. For example, instead of saying, "I'm tired," you say, "My spirit is being tested." Instead of, "This feels wrong," it becomes, "The leader knows better." The language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. Cults engineer this effect with precision. They flood the mind with simplified dualities: pure versus impure, loyal versus traitor, chosen versus lost. The world becomes binary, and nuance, the key to independent thought, disappears. Soon, conversation itself becomes surveillance. Members monitor each other's speech for wrong talk. Fear of saying the wrong word becomes fear of thinking the wrong thought. And so the system sustains itself, not through violence, but through linguistic obedience. Language becomes the invisible leash that keeps the mind tethered. And the most chilling part? People start to censor themselves voluntarily, believing they're protecting purity, when in truth they're silencing freedom. Point 5. The leader archetype. Every cult has a gravitational center, a figure who radiates certainty. They appear as saviors, prophets, or enlightened teachers. But beneath the surface, they are master manipulators of perception. The cult leader is not chosen by divine power. They are self-appointed architects of illusion. Their greatest weapon isn't wisdom. It's charisma. Charisma is the psychological glue that binds followers. It's a carefully crafted performance, blending confidence with vulnerability. The leader seems to see you in ways no one else ever did. They mirror your hopes, your fears, your longing for meaning, and then they position themselves as the only answer. Psychologically, this dynamic activates a parental archetype. Followers unconsciously project childhood needs onto the leader, the need to be guided, protected, loved unconditionally. The leader rewards this dependency by offering certainty, the most addictive illusion the human brain can feel, because certainty feels like safety, and in an uncertain world, safety feels holy. But certainty has a cost. To preserve it, doubt must die. And so, followers stop questioning, stop thinking critically. Their loyalty becomes proof of faith. The leader's word becomes law. Their emotions become moral compass. Their desires become divine commands. What's even more sinister, many leaders start to believe their own myth. The performance becomes delusion. They lose touch with reality, yet gain total power over others. This is not just narcissism, it's pathological conviction. The cult leader doesn't just lie to others. They reconstruct truth itself around their own image. In psychology, we call this totalistic authority. The belief that one human can define reality for another is the ultimate corruption of influence and the heart of all mind control systems. 6. Fear and guilt conditioning. If love is the bait, then fear is the chain. After emotional capture and isolation, cults begin conditioning through fear and guilt. These are the two emotions that most effectively suppress autonomy. Fear keeps you from leaving. Guilt keeps you from questioning. The process starts gently. Stories of divine punishment, warnings about outsiders, subtle suggestions that leaving equals spiritual death. Soon, fear becomes omnipresent. Members live under a constant sense of surveillance. If not by the leader, then by God, the universe, or karma. The idea of leaving triggers panic, nausea, even nightmares. Fear rewires the brain's threat system. The amygdala, the emotional alarm center, stays on high alert. Your body begins to associate freedom with danger. But fear alone isn't enough. It must be paired with guilt. Whenever a member doubts or disobeys, they are told they're hurting the group, disappointing the leader, or failing their mission. Guilt transforms rebellion into sin. Instead of resisting punishment, followers self-punish. That's the brilliance of psychological slavery. You don't need bars when the prisoner polices themselves. Cults even ritualize guilt. Confession circles, repentance ceremonies, public humiliation disguised as purification. Each act reinforces shame, breaks ego, and binds loyalty tighter. Over time, fear and guilt become intertwined, a feedback loop of control. Fear tells you, don't leave. Guilt whispers, you don't deserve to. And the deeper it goes, the less you need the cult to enforce obedience. Your mind does it for them. 7. Breaking the individual identity. After love, isolation, and fear comes the most destructive phase, the erasure of the self. The goal is not just obedience, but transformation, turning a unique individual into a reflection of the group's ideology. The process begins subtly through rituals of sameness, matching clothes, identical hairstyles, communal living. Everything that made you you is dissolved in a sea of imitation. Cults understand that identity is built on repetition. If you repeat something long enough, words, rituals, postures, it becomes part of your neurological patterning. That's why chants, prayers, and mantras are so effective. They blur thinking and feeling until logic and emotion merge into one obedient rhythm. Sleep deprivation, fasting, sensory overload. These techniques weaken mental boundaries. When the body is exhausted, the mind becomes pliable clay. You start to forget what you used to believe. Your memories feel distant, like dreams of another life. The old you becomes an enemy of your current self. And then comes the final break, the death of self-ownership. You stop saying, I think. You start saying, we believe. It feels comforting, like unity, but it's really psychological disintegration. You become part of a hive mind, and individuality becomes treason. That's the dark paradox of cult psychology. The loss of self is sold as spiritual awakening. They tell you you're transcending the ego, when in truth your ego is being erased. The greatest manipulation of all is convincing someone that slavery is enlightenment. 8. The illusion of choice. No cult tells you you're trapped. They tell you you're free. Free to choose, but only what the group allows. This is the illusion of choice, a psychological mirage where obedience is disguised as autonomy. You're told, you can leave any time, but you'll lose your purpose. You can disagree, but disagreement means betrayal. You can think for yourself, but only if you think correctly. This double bind is devastating. No matter what you choose, you lose. If you comply, you surrender freedom. If you resist, you face punishment or exile. The mind, trapped in contradiction, starts to rationalize submission as the smart choice. That's how the illusion works. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, when repeated conflict teaches the brain that resistance is useless. Over time, your nervous system stops even trying to rebel. You start to say things like, I'm here by choice. I'm not brainwashed. I just believe deeply. And in that moment, the illusion is complete. The cult doesn't need to imprison your body. It only needs to convince your mind that staying is your decision. True control isn't when someone forces you to obey. It's when you choose to obey without realizing you were programmed to. That's not devotion. That's design. Point 9. Cognitive dissonance and rationalization. Mind control is not just about what you believe. It's about how you explain away the pain of contradiction. Inside every cult lives a quiet war between truth and comfort. When followers witness lies, abuse, or hypocrisy, the mind begins to tremble. But instead of collapsing, it adapts. This adaptation is called cognitive dissonance, the unbearable tension of holding two opposing realities. To survive that tension, the brain rewrites one of them. It's easier to change your interpretation than to confront your captor. So when the leader fails, the follower says, "The test was for our faith." When promises break, "We were not ready to receive them." When doubt arises, this is the darkness before enlightenment. Each rationalization acts like a psychological bandage. It stops the bleeding but leaves the wound infected. The more contradictions pile up, the more elaborate the justifications become. Eventually, truth and fiction merge into one emotional necessity. To question the cult means to destroy the very structure that gives life meaning. So the believer chooses comfort over clarity. They defend the cage because it feels like home. That is the ultimate success of mind control. Not that it convinces you, but that it makes you afraid to see. 10. The gradual erosion of critical thinking. No one loses critical thinking overnight. It's not a switch. It's a slow corrosion. Each small surrender, a skipped question, an unspoken doubt, eats away at the muscles of the mind. Cults design routines that exhaust analysis. Constant repetition, emotional highs, endless sermons. When every hour is filled with noise, there's no silence left to think. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that evaluates logic, needs rest and reflection to function. Deprived of both, it defaults to automatic obedience. Members stop comparing perspectives because the group forbids comparison. They stop weighing evidence because faith replaces reason. The habit of questioning decays like an unused limb. And here lies the cruel genius. The less you think critically, the safer you feel. Certainty becomes comfort. Ambiguity becomes threat. When a system rewards blind faith and punishes curiosity, eventually no one dares to ask anything at all. That's not enlightenment. That's cognitive atrophy. A mind deliberately starved until it forgets hunger. 11. Financial and sexual exploitation. Once psychological submission is complete, exploitation begins. At this stage, control turns tangible, measured in money, labor, and bodies. Financial exploitation is framed as spiritual investment. Followers give everything: savings, property, even inheritance, convinced that sacrifice will earn eternal reward. The leader, meanwhile, calls greed purity. Every transaction hides manipulation. To give is to prove devotion. To doubt is to reveal corruption. Gradually, members become financially dependent. They work for the cult, live in cult housing, buy food only from cult stores. Freedom becomes economically impossible. Then comes the most intimate form of control: sexual exploitation. Disguised as sacred union or divine cleansing, it's actually coercion masked as transcendence. Victims are told their resistance is ego, that submission equals spiritual growth. They obey out of faith and end up consumed by shame. And shame is the perfect leash. The more you feel it, the less you speak. Behind the spiritual language lies a cold transaction: power for purity, dominance for devotion, abuse for silence. 12. Why people don't escape. From the outside, it seems obvious. Why don't they just leave? But to the believer, leaving feels like annihilation. By this point, the cult is not a group, it's an identity. It defines purpose, morality, relationships, even time itself. To walk away is to kill the self that believes. The brain's reward system has been rewired. Obedience releases relief. Rebellion triggers panic. The body itself becomes loyal. Many former members describe trying to escape and feeling physical paralysis, nausea, or terror, as if invisible hands held them in place. Add to that the loss of community. Family gone. Friends replaced by traitors. Where could they go? So they stay. They rationalize. They tell themselves, it's not that bad. It's easier to suffer within a story that makes sense than to suffer alone in chaos. That is why rescue from a cult rarely begins with argument. It begins with connection. Someone on the outside must become the new anchor, offering the same belonging the cult once monopolized. Only then can the mind begin to untie the knots it once called truth. Point 13. Deprogramming and recovery. Escaping a cult is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a war between the old programming and the reborn self. At first, freedom feels alien. Silence feels dangerous. Choice feels heavy. The mind still listens for commands that no one is giving. Deprogramming isn't about erasing memories. It's about reclaiming authorship of thought. Therapists call this cognitive re-anchoring, relinking emotions and ideas to the individual, not the group. Step 1 is safety. Without a stable, non-judging environment, recovery collapses. The survivor must relearn the feeling of security without control. Step 2 is reconnection. Old friends, family, simple daily routines. These rebuild a sense of identity that doesn't depend on ideology. Step 3 is critical reflection. Here the former member examines how manipulation worked, not to relive pain but to rebuild immunity. Each realization, that wasn't love, that was control, reclaims a piece of stolen autonomy. Nightmares come. Guilt resurfaces. There's grief for wasted years and shame for blind devotion. But those emotions are proof of healing. They mean the self is feeling again. Deprogramming takes months, sometimes years. The goal isn't to destroy faith, but to separate belief from bondage. Freedom doesn't mean disbelief. It means the ability to choose what to believe. Point 14. The modern cults you don't see. Cults have evolved. They no longer live in compounds or deserts, they live online. Algorithms amplify certainty and isolate dissent. Influencers promise transformation. Communities promise belonging. Love bombing becomes viral positivity. Isolation becomes echo chambers. Information control becomes algorithmic filtering. The leader's charisma is now delivered in 4K resolution. Followers aren't called believers, they're subscribers. Every glowing screen is a potential pulpit. Every algorithm a silent preacher. Modern cults don't need to control bodies, only attention. Where attention goes, belief grows. 15. Final reflection. The invisible chains. The strongest prisons are invisible. They live in repeated words, unexamined fears, and silent surrender of thought. The most dangerous leaders whisper, comfort, and promise clarity in exchange for obedience. Victims often believe they are free. True liberation begins with awareness. Pausing before you believe, questioning even the voice that says, "Trust me." The battle for the mind was never fought with guns. It was fought with stories. Break the story, and the chains fall silent.